Over the past year or so, I've become kind of haunted by this one question that keeps nagging at my brain, and I really can't get rid of it. And the question, as you probably know if you clicked on this video, is do we listen to too much music? At first glance, this seems like a pretty absurd question, especially coming from me. I've dedicated my entire life to celebrating, studying, and educating people on music. It's been my career for the better part of a decade and an enormous part of my identity for even longer. So it might seem antithetical to even say there's such a thing as too much music. And really, trust me, I've had my doubts about this thought. I talked it out with Corey from 12 Tone on a Ghost Notes episode and hoped that would talk me down and sate me. And, you know, they had a lot of good points and we explored the topic well, but this question just kept coming back to me. Chances are there's already people running into the comments to take this thought in the worst, most bad faith place possible, so I want to be very clear here. This is not a well thought out thesis. This is not a definitive statement that I'm trying to make. This is a bit of a thought experiment where I'm going to try to work through these problems in real time and, see where we wind up on the other side. It's not meant as a personal attack on anyone's listening habits, and it's definitely not saying music is bad or anything like that. Music is, in my mind, a pretty unequivocal force for good, but sometimes I do wonder if it's possible to have too much of a good thing. Think about it. Every year, Spotify Wrapped drops, and we see people who have listened to thousands and thousands of hours of music every year, people who spend most of their waking lives with a song in their ears. You pretty much can't go out in public without encountering people listening to music. People listen to music while driving, while doing chores, while walking the dog, while studying, while working out, while working, while having sex, while falling asleep, basically during any facet of their life. On their own, none of these are particularly egregious, but taken together, the result is thousands, if not millions of people who spend vast swaths of their lifetimes without ever really being alone with their thoughts. And that's created some worrying trends. A growing body of research is suggesting that this world of media oversaturation is having very real impacts on our attention spans and cognitive functions. As those attention spans shrink, it makes it harder for us to focus, harder for us to learn, and I think it can even fundamentally change our experience of art. I know my experience of music has changed a lot as my attention span has shrunk in the modern age. When I was younger, I used to spend a lot of time listening to music. I'd just close my eyes or shut off the lights, lay back, and give the music my full and undivided attention, letting it wash over me and whisk me away to other worlds. I would devote the entirety of my attention to the music and be rewarded with truly profound listening experiences. The shivers of frisson running across my body, feeling the surges of triumphant joy and painful catharsis that my favorite artists laced through their songs. These days I find it much more difficult to just sit down and focus on music like that. Maybe this is just a me thing, and maybe nobody else has experienced this disconnect from focusing wholeheartedly on music, but, somehow I doubt that. Now, obviously, the ubiquitous availability of music is not the only culprit for our age of diminished attention spans. It's just one facet of a wider media ecosystem. And I think there's really too much going on in that ecosystem to singularly lay the blame on how easy it is to listen to music now. But this shortening of attention spans is only one aspect of why this question has been running through my head. I think there are much, much bigger things at play here, and those things have to do with the important role that music plays in weaving together the very fabric of human society. You see, for nearly the entirety of human history, there were two ways to hear music. You could either be in a room where people were playing music, or you could be playing music yourself. That only really started to change in the mid-1800s with the invention of automated music systems like the musical box or the player piano. These were followed in relatively short succession by the inventions of radio and sound recording. Suddenly, for the first time in human history, people could reliably listen to others play music without having to leave the comfort of their own home. Of course, there were all sorts of limitations in these early days. Audiences had a pretty small choice of radio programs to listen to, and the audio fidelity of phonograph records was not good. But as the 20th century pushed on, these limitations shrank. A greater variety of radio stations appeared, and magnetic tape recording drastically improved fidelity. The vinyl record emerged and allowed for more data storage, pairing with cheaper, portable turntables that moved music from the family sitting room into private, individual bedrooms. Then came cassettes and Walkmans, followed by CDs, Discmans, and the iPod. All these inventions have been fantastic for the music consumer and allowed popular music to really thrive, but each and every one of them has transformed music more and more into an individual experience. That can be good in a lot of ways. It makes it a lot easier for people to discover who they are through music, and it allows musicians to create stranger and more diverse music than ever before. But this shift toward individualistic listening has a cost as well. You see, dating back to the earliest historical record, music has always played an important role in bringing human communities together. Song and dance are cornerstones of countless folk traditions, from religious ceremonies and festivals to weddings to things like work songs and death rites. Obviously, many of these traditions do still persevere, but plenty have fallen by the wayside in a post-industrial world, and more are waning with each passing generation. I'm not trying to appeal to an imagined idyllic past here. I really do like modernity, and I think it's brought on vast improvements in human life. But at the same time, at least in my culture, I think it's contributing to a loss of some of the things that make us human. The richness and necessity of these musical traditions is dampened by a world where music is readily available at the click of a button. When people can listen to anything they want from the comfort of their own home, they're far less likely to actively seek out music. And that active seeking of music plays a huge role in community building. A 2013 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology demonstrated that people's emotional responses to music are intrinsically tied to the other core social phenomena that bind us together into groups. Anecdotally, this certainly rings true for me. Anytime I find myself in a room clapping or singing along with others, I feel a profound sense of connectedness. The social importance of this is only magnified when you take into account the ongoing loneliness epidemic that is tearing across a lot of Western cultures. As our society has shifted away from communal folk musics and toward a commercial pop industry built to serve individual tastes, I think it's weakening music's role as social glue. That doesn't mean it's eradicated these things entirely. There are still plenty of rich musical traditions that bring people together, from community choirs and church services to local coffee houses and even karaoke nights. And there are still plenty of people who are involved in these older ways of making music. But on a wider scale, I think it's diminishing. And that's a reflection of a culture that teaches the base unit of humanity as the individual, not the community, and does everything it can to cater to the whims and tastes of that individual. Rather than being involved in local scenes, more and more music fans are being drawn to enormous commercial world tours put on by the pop industry. These tours are often profound experiences that do a pretty good job of creating a facsimile of connection for an evening, but when they're over, people just disperse from the arena and go back home until the next show. It's a different mode of operation than folk music, which continually draws people back to the same decentralized practices that put the focus on participating in music rather than observing and witnessing it. Okay, so we've gotten to a point where clearly I've strayed away from the original question over the course of this rant, but I still think it's relevant. I think that the more music we're able to listen to with ease and comfort, the less likely we are to seek out spaces to participate in music within our communities. There's a sacredness to music in a lot of cultural traditions, and I think for a long time, that sacredness was tied to music's relative novelty. I've talked on this channel lots about how limitations on the creative process lead to better art, and I think that also might be true from a listening perspective. Limitations on the art that we are able to consume make the act of consuming art feel more special and more sacred. And today, there's almost no limitations on the music we consume. Hell, with the advent of recommendations algorithms, we're not even limited by having to choose what music we put on. And that's by design. The goal of platforms like Spotify is to remove the last vestiges of audience interfacing with musician. There's a reason why they curate mixes for you, and why they'll run you into algorithmically suggested autoplays. The entire goal of streaming platforms is for you to think of the streaming platform when you think of music, rather than to think of the artists themselves. Spotify wants you just to trust that it knows what you want to listen to, because that gives it complete power over the musician. It's a devil's bargain. In exchange for being able to listen to all the music you want at all hours of the day without even having to think about what you want, Spotify and platforms like it gain absolute financial control over those who are making the music. This is what allows them to set horrible terms that make it damn near impossible to make a living as a musician. It allows them to turn profits year after year, all while the musical traditions that have been part of the fabric of human society for millennia are left to waste away and evaporate. This, for me, is the dark side of our era of non-stop music. We live in an age when it's never been easier to make music, and it's never been easier to listen to music, but it also might never have been harder to make a living as a musician. And at least in my mind, this is directly tied to the profound access to music that we have thanks to modern technology. But if all of this really is the fault of us listening to too much music, that would seem to suggest we could stop these problems by just cutting down on our listening habits. And unfortunately, I don't think that's the case. I do think that being more intentional about our listening habits, trying to give less support to platforms and more support to musicians, and reaching out and becoming more involved in our local music communities can help to dampen these problems. But really, these are all individualistic answers to a collective problem. I'd be lying if I said this is where I expected to end up when I interrogated this question. And really, I think it proves that maybe I have been obsessing over the wrong question this entire time. Because do we listen to too much music is a vast oversimplification that kind of runs adjacent to all of the stuff I've been talking about in this video. Really, I think the questions we might want to ask are more like, how can we recenter music around the human condition? But that's not really flashy, and I gotta play the clickbait game because my profession too lives at the whims of platforms. So maybe the easiest question is just this: how can we be better at sharing the experience of music with each other? I guess that's part of what I'm trying to do with this channel. It's part of what I've always tried to do with this channel. And I know shouting content into the void is hardly going to change the world, but hey, maybe it's a start. Music is far from the only industry being worryingly transformed by recommendations algorithms. These algorithms have completely changed the way we engage with news, which has resulted in people being pushed further and further into their own echo chambers to the detriment of, well, basically everyone. That's why I'm a big fan of this week's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News is a website and app designed to help you pull back the curtain on media bias. Every story you find on there comes with a visual breakdown of political bias, factuality, and ownership of sources reporting. And all of this is backed by 3 independent news monitoring organizations. One story I've been following closely on Ground News is the assault allegations against Jay-Z. Thanks to Ground News, I can see how many sources have covered this story, and I can also see that there is a strong tilt toward the center and left, with only 57 right-leaning sources covering it, as opposed to 116 left and 127 center. And looking at the headlines, it's easy to see some of the differences in reporting. More of the left-leaning headlines are explicit about the allegations, while many of the right-leaning ones focus more on Jay-Z's denial and defense. Beyond just showing you about stories that you are following, Ground News is also great at highlighting stories you might have missed due to your own echo chamber. Their blind spot feature highlights stories that are only getting coverage from one side of the political spectrum. As someone with a background in journalism, I really do believe in the integral role that news media plays in the function of modern society, and I think Ground News is a great tool to help strengthen and maintain that role. So that's why I'm really happy to say that if you go to the link in the description, you can get 50% off a Vantage subscription. That is the best deal that they give all year. So check it out now. Following that link is a great way to support my channel, and it's also a great way of supporting an independent media organization that's trying to make the landscape more transparent. Thank you all so much for watching, and hey, This is going to be my last video of the year, so I just wanted to say happy holidays to all of you. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you in the new year. I got some stuff lined up, maybe. We'll see. We'll see. There's probably going to be some stuff coming in the new year. You might like it. All right. Bye.